Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. This time we're going to be tackling something a little different, but something that's becoming more and more relevant to really all of us. We're diving into the world of geodata and its cybersecurity.
A fascinating area.
It really is. And we're basing this deep dive on this essay by Jörg-Owe. He really goes into, I think, a lot of the important aspects of geodata. So we're going to kind of use that as our springboard.
Yeah, Schneppat's work is really insightful. And honestly, this topic, it might sound kind of niche, but think about it. Geodata is kind of the invisible force behind so much of our daily lives.
It really is.
It's everything from obviously Google Maps and finding our way around.
Yeah.
To even you ever get those eerily targeted ads on your phone?
All the time.
Yeah, geodata.
Yeah.
But it goes way beyond that, right? It's used in tracking natural disasters, coordinating emergency response. It's incredibly important stuff.
Yeah, so it's more than just maps.
Oh, way more. Schneppat actually breaks it down into 5 distinct types of geodata, and each has its own, quirks and security concerns. First up, we've got vector data.
Okay.
And this is kind of think of it as the digital drawing on a map.
Yeah.
So you've got your points for specific locations, right? Lines representing roads, polygons for areas like parks. It's the basic building blocks of a lot of digital maps.
Okay, so that makes sense. I mean, we see that, every day.
Yeah.
What about some of the other types? I know Schneppat talks about something called raster data.
Right. Raster data. That's more like a digital photograph.
Okay.
So instead of those defined points and lines, it uses a grid of pixels, and each pixel has a specific value, right? So this is what you see with satellite imagery. When you're looking at deforestation or the aftermath of a hurricane, that kind of imagery, it's all raster data.
So with vector, we're looking at shapes, and raster is pixels.
Exactly. Now imagine you take those satellite images, right, and you create a flip book,
okay,
showing how things change over time, and that's what we call time series data. And with that, we can see things like urban sprawl happening, glaciers melting. You can track the path of a hurricane. It's pretty powerful stuff.
It's like having a time machine for the Earth, really. and it's all based on geodata.
It is. And then it gets even more interesting because you've got geostatistical data.
Okay.
And this is where you use statistics to kind of reveal the hidden patterns within geodata.
Okay.
So think about predicting areas that are at a high risk of flooding or figuring out the best places to drill for oil. It's all about extracting these insights from the data.
So geostatistical data is kind of like predicting the future, but based on what we know.
Exactly. It's really fascinating. And then finally, you've got, Schneppat talks about metadata, and this one's kind of crucial.
Okay.
Because metadata is essentially data about data. It tells you about the reliability of a data set. Where did it come from? How was it collected? How accurate is it? It's kind of like the quality control stamp for geodata. Without it, we really can't be sure about the information we're using.
So it's the trust but verify part of the geodata world.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we've got these 5 types. Each one's a little different, but let's get into some of the nitty-gritty here. Schneppat paints a pretty concerning picture about the security of all this data. So let's talk about some of the big threats that we should all be aware of.
Yeah, I mean, Schneppat highlights insider threats.
Okay.
And this is a big one because it's not always about some, hacker in a foreign country. Sometimes the biggest risk comes from right inside an organization. Think about disgruntled employees, unintentional errors, or even just carelessness, right? All of those can expose sensitive data and leave it vulnerable.
So it's really the human element, we're often the weakest link.
Exactly.
What about external threats, though? Does Schneppat address those too?
Oh, absolutely. He brings up the vulnerability of complex supply chains, right? Because the software and hardware used to collect all this geodata, to store it, to analyze it, it often comes from, different vendors all over the world. And each link in that chain, it's a potential point of weakness for, some hacker to try and exploit.
So it's like a chain reaction.
Yeah.
One weak link and the whole thing can go down.
Right. And on top of that, Schneppat also talks about the lack of standardized security protocols globally.
Oh, yeah.
Which is it's a big problem because different countries, different organizations, they all have their own way of doing things. So it makes it really tough to create a unified defense against cyber attacks. It's like a patchwork system with a lot of holes.
Right. So we've got internal threats, complex supply chains, and a lack of global standardization. This is concerning. What are some of the big consequences if these vulnerabilities are exploited? Schneppert mentions cyber attacks on critical infrastructure, right?
He does, and that's where things get really scary, because imagine GPS systems malfunctioning, satellite communications getting jammed, power grids going down. These are systems that rely heavily on geodata. And a successful cyber attack, I mean, that could be devastating.
Yeah. And not just disrupting services either. I mean, Schneppert also warns about data manipulation. Right?
Oh, absolutely. And that's a chilling thought. I mean, imagine geodata used for military operations or for disaster response being subtly altered. It could lead to some really disastrous decisions.
Yeah, it's scary to think about. But bringing it back down to a more personal level, how does all this affect, us as individuals?
Well, I mean, think about the information warfare that we all face every day. Those phishing emails, those targeted ads, a lot of that relies on your location data to make things more convincing or more appealing to you. So the security of our own personal information, it's really tied to the security of geodata in a lot of ways.
It's almost like we take for granted how much our lives depend on this stuff working correctly. And securely.
Absolutely. We don't even realize how much we rely on it until something goes wrong.
Yeah, it really is a wake-up call when you start thinking about it. But okay, so we've got these vulnerabilities. What can we actually do to better protect all this geodata? Schneppert talks about some security measures. Right?
He does, yeah. He gets into, I mean, there's the foundational stuff, right? Like encryption. You got to have encryption. Access controls. And of course, solid incident response plans.
Oh, yeah.
These are essential for any kind of cybersecurity strategy, really. But as Schneppert points out, you gotta tailor them to the unique challenges that geodata presents.
So it's not just a one-size-fits-all approach.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. You got to get specific. And another thing Schneppert emphasizes is ongoing employee training.
Okay.
Because even with the best tech, the best security systems in place, humans, we are still the biggest risk factor a lot of the time. So he's really advocating for creating this culture of cybersecurity within organizations, making sure everyone understands the risks.
So it's like building a human firewall.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Everyone's got to be on board. And he also suggests implementing things like data classification and role-based access.
Okay.
Because, not everyone needs access to everything, right?
Yeah.
So by compartmentalizing information and who can access what, you can limit the damage if a breach does happen.
It's like minimizing the blast radius.
Exactly. Schneppert also, he includes some really interesting case studies in his essay.
Oh, does he?
Yeah. And they really show the real world consequences that can hit organizations when they don't protect geodata properly.
So it's not just a hypothetical threat.
Oh, no, not at all. I mean, some companies have even faced securities fraud lawsuits because of geodata breaches.
Oh.
Yeah. I mean, it just goes to show that neglecting cybersecurity, I mean, it can really hit you where it hurts. The bottom line.
For sure. Okay, so we've talked about the threats, the consequences. What about the future? What's coming down the pipeline in terms of geodata security? Does Schneppert offer any insights into that?
He does, yeah. He sees this increasing integration of geospatial data into cybersecurity frameworks.
Okay.
So imagine a global radar system, right? That can track cyber attacks in real time, identify patterns, and use all that information to defend against future threats.
It's like having a bird's eye view of the whole cyber battlefield.
Right. And then he also talks about the rise of what he calls virtual safety fences.
Virtual safety fences.
Yeah, basically it's like a digital boundaries around sensitive geospatial data meant to block unauthorized access.
Okay.
So think of it like a digital fortress protecting, power grids, transportation systems, military installations, all that critical stuff.
Right. Especially as all those systems become even more reliant on geodata. That seems really important.
Absolutely. And of course, we can't talk about the future without talking about AI. The big question is, how does AI fit into all of this?
Yeah. Schneppert addresses that, right?
He does. And he kind of acknowledges that AI it's a double-edged sword in this context.
Okay. How so?
Well, on the one hand, it can be used to create more sophisticated cyber attacks. Think about AI-powered phishing scams or malware that can adapt and learn and become even harder to detect.
Yeah, it's like AI is making the threats we already have even worse. But I thought Schneppert also saw AI as a potential solution as well.
He does. He sees the potential for AI to be a powerful force for good here. Think about AI algorithms that can, sift through massive amounts of data, detect anomalies, identify potential threats, and even predict attacks before they happen.
It's like having an AI bodyguard for your data.
Yeah. Constantly monitoring, learning, adapting. So AI can be both a weapon and a shield in this whole geodata security game.
It's like we're entering a cyber arms race almost with AI.
Yeah.
How do we even navigate that, according to Schneppat?
Well, I think Schneppat believes that, it comes down to responsible innovation and ethical considerations, really, when we're developing AI. It's not just about creating the most powerful algorithms, right? It's about making sure they're used in a way that benefits, all of us and upholds our values.
It's like a human-centered approach to AI.
Mm-hmm.
We can't forget about the ethics. But all of this can sound a bit overwhelming, the threats, the trends. What can we as individuals actually do to protect ourselves?
Yeah, it can be a bit daunting. Schneppat, he gives some practical advice. I think first and foremost, it's about awareness. Just being mindful of the data we're generating. Every app you use, every website, even just carrying your smartphone, it creates this digital trail.
It's easy to feel like, you're just a pawn in this giant data game. But Schneppat reminds us that we do have choices. We can limit the data we share. We can be more careful about the apps we use and make sure our privacy settings are, set up the way we want them.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to ask questions, right? Demand transparency from the companies that are collecting your data. What are they doing with it? How are they protecting it? And if you don't like the answers, vote with your wallet, take your business elsewhere.
It's about being an informed and an empowered consumer. Are there other things Schneppat recommends for being more proactive about geodata security?
He really emphasizes staying informed about, the laws and regulations around data privacy and security. They're constantly evolving and, support policies that promote those things. You can contact your elected officials, advocate for stronger consumer protections, and really hold companies accountable.
So it's not just individual actions, but engaging in the bigger conversation about data privacy and security. Well, as we wrap up our deep dive into Jörg-Owe Schneppat's essay, I think the biggest takeaway is that, the cybersecurity of geodata, it's not just a tech issue, it's a societal issue.
Absolutely. It's something we all need to be thinking about and talking about. Finding that balance between innovation and security, between convenience and privacy. That's what's really important.
Yeah. Well, Schneppat leaves us with this, I think, pretty thought-provoking question. As geodata becomes more and more precise and more pervasive and more powerful, are we really prepared for the ethical dilemmas that are coming with it? Something to think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.